Okay, if we can just do a quick sound check. Can one of the Andrews let me know that the outside traffic is not an issue?
Dawn, I can hear you. You broke up just a little bit there, though.
Okay, we'll close the door.
I like how they do puzzles.
Close it completely. Does that sound better, Andrew?
That sounds great. Yep.
Okay. Then, Ms. Fuller, I will turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Welcome everyone to the La Jara Antonito listening session for the housing community assessments. So my name is Willa Williford, and I'm a workforce housing consultant based in the Gunnison Valley, and I've been working with Don Malgaris and the communities across the valley now for almost a year to understand the housing needs at a regional level and at the very specific community focused level. And so we have a strong drafts of these community specific reports in front of us, and our goal today is to get feedback from you all to make them, refine them and make them better and more accurate, more representative, and help point us in the right direction for the future housing work. So, and I think if you don't mind changing the slide. So we're gonna give a little overview of the valley-wide assessment, share some metrics about these two communities, and then have an open discussion, and we're going to focus our time in that discussion portion. So the way that looks just in agenda format, next slide, is we'll go around the room, do some quick introductions. This is a hybrid meeting, obviously. And then about 15 minutes or so presentation, and then the majority of the rest of the time for discussion. So I've already introduced myself. Maybe I can pass it to the left to Jeff,
Okay.
And then we'll go to online after we've been in this room.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Owsley. I'm with CHAFA, Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. And I am representing 9 counties of Colorado based from Alamosa. So all of the San Luis Valley, Lake County, Chaffee County, and Hinsdale County. And so I'm just really excited about this process because I think it's going to really propel things forward in the area of housing around the whole San Luis Valley.
Hello, my name is Karen Hinojos. I work for the Conejos County Housing Authority. Here in La Jara, we have a total of 44 units in La Jara, Manassas, and Sanford. And I'm very excited about this. And we know that we need housing, and now this housing study will prove that we need housing, so that we can look forward into the future and possibly bring more affordable housing to the area.
Let's start with, can we start on the Zoom call with Jan?
Hi, my name is Jan Miller, and I represent Rocky Mountain SARE.
Okay. Eloise?
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for having us. I also am with Rocky Mountain SARE. My name is Eloise Wenzel, and I too am very excited about hopefully listening, learning, and seeing how our organization can help with the needs of the community. So thank you.
Randy?
Hi, everybody. Randy Sneed with Department of Local Affairs and the Regional Assistant in the Valley and in the Southeast Colorado. So we're helping to fund the housing assessment on the community level. So I'm just trying to hop in on all of these and kind of get a a feel for what's going on across the valley. Thank you.
I'm gonna turn this down just a second. Miriam?
Hi, my name is Miriam Barella. I apologize, I have my camera off. I have my grandson with me, but my name is Miriam Barella, and San Luis Valley Area Manager for RMSCR.
Great. Andrew A.
Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Ashley with the Colorado Division of Housing. I'm the Housing Development Specialist that covers the San Luis Valley and Southwest Colorado.
Andrew C.
Good afternoon, everybody. Andrew Coburn with Urban Rural Continuum, part of the consulting team that's been working closely with Dawn in preparation of all of these documents. And thanks for taking the time to be here.
Sam.
Hi, I'm Sam Snyder. I've been working with Willa and Andrew on these reports as well, and I'm excited to hear your feedback.
Thank you. And then I'm Dawn Melgaris. I'm with the San Luis Valley Housing Coalition. We helped commission this study working with a large group of local individuals from around the valley and several funders, including DOLA, CHAFA, Colorado Health Foundation, because we wanted to see what the current housing looked like and how the Housing Coalition and other organizations can help find solutions to anything that we're seeing out there. We also run several programs and we're trying to see how we can make our programs better. But our overall goal, and it's my favorite thing to do, is I'd like to spend the money that's coming down the housing pipeline from the Division of Housing, CHAFA, and other funders. This area has been kind of underutilizing these funds, and we're ready to bring them to the valley and put them to work for each of our communities.
Thank you. So we'll jump into the assessment overview now. So the study area that we covered was the 6 counties, really looking at the overall big trends and then setting the stage for getting into the more detailed community reports that we're at now. Go ahead. So the key findings, the large document is available on Dawn's website, and you can, if you have specific questions or you like to dig into the data, that's a great resource because it has quite a bit of detail. So, but just taking a high level summary, I want to highlight sort of these 8 dynamics. So I think everyone's very familiar that housing prices have been increasing. The last assessment, it was in 2009, and they've been up 66% dramatically for sale, and then about 30% for rent, but some of the markets have gone up more in rent. It's just, that's more variable locally. The high construction costs, both labor and materials, have been going up even more rapidly than housing costs. So there isn't, or housing prices. So the private market hasn't been able to respond to the gaps that we're seeing. And that's driven by a lot of factors sort of outside of the valley and in the valley. Then the high housing payments that people are needing to make to afford these increased housing prices are putting a lot of stress and burden on individuals and families. And we see almost half of our renters are having to pay more than 30% of their income, and about a quarter of our owners. And so that just doesn't leave the money to pay for the other things you need in your life. As the housing market's very tight, people are they're making a lot of trade-offs, especially around location, not necessarily living close to where they work, even though that might be their preference. And then that adds to their cost burden because it's a sort of a hidden cost of all that commuting. Then another dynamic, which is a little bit different but related, is the issue of residential sprawl. So 73% of the building permits over the past 10 years have been pulled for unincorporated areas. So these are outside of our towns and cities. And that's both expensive for the owner or renter who's living and needing to commute and bring their utilities and all of those things. and also expensive for local government in terms of maintaining roads and providing health and safety kind of services. So when we look at the housing inventory and just what's out there, we also observed and heard a lot of a concern around the limited choices, that, you know, single family homes and manufactured homes are pretty much where it's at. And that there aren't things for people in other life phases or choices that are more affordable to build or use more land more efficiently. Then, you know, certainly a consistent theme that you're all probably familiar with is the aging population, and how the lack of people leaving the valley in their working years, and that putting some strains on the economy and ability to provide services and fill certain jobs. So that labor shortage then, you know, is exacerbated by those increasing prices, because as you post a job or you try to grow your business or hire in, you know, in healthcare or schools, you aren't able to attract people because they aren't able to find the housing that they need or afford the housing that is here. So that's sort of the big picture trends about, you know, what we observe is feeding into this substantial housing problem. We can skip this one. And we did ask employers for quite a bit of feedback in this process of the study, both through surveys and interviews. And employers were very consistent in reporting that housing is a moderate problem, a serious problem, or the most critical problem in the valley. There were very few employers who were untouched by this issue. So all of which to say, when we did the math of sort of what would create a functional rental market, functional for sale market, address job growth and retiring employees, looking out over the next 5 years, our conclusion was that there's a need for about 1,885 housing units across the valley. Now, these could be new construction. They could also be bringing existing homes back into use, because the theme of abandoned or dilapidated homes is something we're going to jump into here in a minute. We also took a look at how, you know, okay, here's this very large number, and we're not necessarily recommending that you try to tackle the whole number, but if you were going to, how might you spread it across the county? And then we took 2 different approaches. You could locate new homes, or, you know, put your efforts into revitalizing homes where jobs are located or where households are already located. And so in the case of Conejos County, there's significantly more households here than jobs. So you'll see that sort of difference in the 2 bars of we'd allocate about 221 units for jobs and about 308 if we were looking at households. And, you know, the truth may lie somewhere in the middle, and certainly we want these communities to start small and really test up and prove their markets. And you know, please don't take away from this, oh my gosh, we need to go do 200 or 300 units. But this is just the sort of raw math. So 5 key recommendations out of the Valley-wide study. Economic development and housing go hand in hand. I don't think you'll find that to be any surprise, but I think often now I'm talking with economic development people and all roads lead back to housing. And so they can't do economic development can't do its job well without housing, and vice versa. More housing is needed across the spectrum of housing types and prices. So to that point about sort of variety and diversity, and can you find the thing that you need for your current situation, whether you're getting married or buying your first home, or becoming an empty nester and wanting to downsize or age in place. That spectrum and variety is recommended. Definitely, we are one regional market with really interesting and unique situations in specific communities. So that's what we're hoping to drill in today, of what La Jara and Antonito, and what's special and cool, and what are the opportunities there here. Then I already mentioned starting small and building upon promising practices. In our markets where we've been losing population or where nothing new has been built in quite some time, it's really important to be incremental. And then equity, diversity, and inclusion moving forward. We're just recommending that anytime regulations are being put in place to address housing or new funding's being brought in, that we're very mindful of that. That's creating opportunities to lift everyone up and not create segregation or winners or losers, or that it's very fair and thoughtful compared to some ways it's been in past history. So I wanted to introduce our housing bridge. Our funders like Jeff and Andrew, who are on this call, use the metric of area median income, AMI. And so this represents where different funding sources might apply relative to income and what kind of housing people might be accessing based on their income. So we are seeing gaps in the valley across most of this rainbow, but really particularly in the below 80% AMI and the missing middle. So heading now, kind of transitioning from the big picture of the valley to the specifics of La Jara and Antonito. It pops up in the wrong place a couple times. So for the town of, these are snapshot slides that are in the report, if you have that handy, just giving a picture of the demographics and the housing sort of at a glance. So in Antonito, about 20% of homes are vacant. And there's a little more than half of the homes that have occupants are owner occupied. The housing market is very tight. I mean, as far as we can tell, it's pretty much only occurring by word of mouth. We found over a 6-month period, 0 units for rent. We found 1 home that was listed for sale, and it was the listing was quite low. It was a very, very old and small home. So that it's really hard to sort of say, here's the market, because it's not functioning very well. There just isn't much to analyze. When we transition to La Jara, transition. Oh, sorry, okay. We'll talk now about Antonito's specifics. So this is a detailed slide of where we are with area median income, what a household two-person household makes, and then what they could afford to own or rent. And so for the town of Antonito, we're looking out to 2026. We think about 30 to 35 homes are needed, and that those price points of below $120,000 for sale and below about $710 for rent are really the heart of your market. And so those can, again, to that sort of issue of like starting small, that bringing a few abandoned or dilapidated homes back into use at these price points would be a really great place to start. But there's also need and opportunity to potentially develop new. So for Antonito, we had looked at a number of potential strategies, and this is where this listening session is particularly relevant, is to make sure we're on track with these, and that there's other things that perhaps have you course correct for us if we've missed things or gotten this wrong. So beginning with the acquisition and renovation of rundown and abandoned homes, this is something that is a theme, and there's many other communities within the valley that are eager to tackle this. And it's kind of cool in Antonito that Don's organization, the San Luis Valley Housing Coalition, has already done a home recently. And we drove by it just before this meeting. It's really a sweet little house. And it allowed a woman who had been living in a housing authority property to move, and then that rental became available for someone else. So there was sort of a double benefit, or double or triple benefit there. So that was at the top of our list in terms of potential goals and actions. We also see the opportunity to utilize some existing programs more. We drove by the old school and are very intrigued about how that could become a more housing-oriented use, whether it might be transitional housing or renovating for apartments or something like that. It's certainly a large facility and seems quite underutilized now. And then, there's other sort of more out there action items that just were from our listening so far, supporting how residents can move out of subsidized housing. How can we keep families together, especially people who want to live intergenerationally? And then just looking at what is the current zoning environment in Antonito? Could it become more user-friendly and just set the roadmap a little better for anyone trying to do work in the town. All right, to Lahara. So in terms of population and households, we're about 10% of the county. Again, very similar to Antonito in terms of the housing market being such a challenge. Nothing for sale, 2 for rent. The rental prices were, a good bit above what we see most residents in the area needing in terms of affordability, even though if they look quite affordable, maybe to someone who is from an urban area. About 15% of homes are vacant, which is different than the rental vacancy. Rental vacancy we measure by who's listing something for rent. Vacant homes we are measuring by, is it a second home or an abandoned home? So I apologize that those two things can be confusing, but that's what we intend there. And so, a nice mix of single family mobile homes and multifamily, but we see there could be more room here in Lahara for duplexes and townhouses. And so I think that could be a consideration going forward. Go ahead. Again, to the detail of the greatest need, it's the same demographic in terms of what we talked about for Lahara. Our recommendation being a little bit smaller, just 25 to 30 units, either new or returning homes to the active housing inventory. We certainly hear an emphasis on starting with rental, and I think that would be wise, and starting small. So in addition to potential goals and actions around renovation of rundown or abandoned homes, and using some of the existing programs more, I think an exciting opportunity in Lahara is the issue of land, and the fact that there is some town-owned land that could be appropriate. We also have the Conejos County Housing Authority as an asset and a resource here. And so pursuing that would be exciting. And then we also continue to be thoughtful about that economic development and housing going hand in hand. And is the zoning and regulations conducive to smaller homes and more variety? So with that, I would love to transition into our discussion portion of the meeting. And I want to pause and say, was there anything kind of up to now that you want clarification on, or did things resonate? Are we on the right track? Are there things that you would like to know that were not covered?
Please feel free to just unmute yourself or raise your hand if you have any thoughts on this. I'm not seeing anything online. How about in the room?
I'm most interested to hear about Karen's reaction.
My reaction suggestion is pretty much knew it. It doesn't surprise me. I guess I would have thought the suggestion would have been that we would need more than 10 to 15 units. 10 to 15 units isn't a lot at all.
And I think we could definitely, we should talk about that because we could certainly, we split it evenly between rental and home ownership based on the current tenure, but we hear more need for rental. So like from a policy perspective or development perspective, it may, and a funding perspective, it may actually be easier to get rental off the ground and maybe what's more needed. So I think we could certainly caveat this too, to sort of say, it's up to the local decision makers to set the course. If we're looking to 25 to 30, you want to go for 100% rental, 80% rental, etc. So that's good to get your gut check about that.
One thing that I didn't notice, and I might have just missed it, is I didn't see anything that talks about like do you see more 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms,
Yes.
Up to 4 bedrooms? Like what is when you break it down that way, what is the need?
Yeah, we can, we did not get heavily into that, but if that would be helpful, we absolutely can.
It would be.
Yep.
When we first started, talking about bringing more housing, we talked about 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, because we thought that bigger families, that was the need. But it seems, in doing more research, it seems like we, and our waiting list, we definitely need more 1 and 2 bedroom homes.
That I think that would we can add that, take a crack at that. And I think based on your waiting list and then some of the feedback we were getting from the developer who was working at Fort Garland, he said he was definitely like, we asked him what would he do differently, because he had 1, 2s, and 3s, and he's like, I would just do 1s and 2s.
Right.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah. Well, and it makes sense too with what the inventory is, because it's like the larger families may already be being served, and if you can, a single person living alone in a 3-bedroom could move to a 1-bedroom.
Right.
It would help. So great. Okay, thank you. Other things that jumped off the page at you, or
no, not that I could think of. Okay.
One thing I'm noticing is the amount of units, it kind of struck me as low too, that was needed. And I just noticed that it says that it's 10% of Coneo's counties is what that is representing.
Yeah.
And so there's a good number of those that are expected to happen in the county, right?
Yes.
Outside of the municipalities. And that is, that's something to take into account too. You could help to provide some of that might be thought to be in the county, but you could do it in the municipality.
Right.
And so looking at those needs as well might help your numbers and understanding.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That we need some kind of bridge between the overall valley-wide big picture and the county distribution. And then, gosh, if in our ideal world we really were building closer, right in town and able to, kind of activate our retail and be close to all the services and be efficient with our land. I want to model out now with Andrew and Sam. What does it look like? What if we said all the new development, and not that this is realistic, but like all the new housing happens in municipalities? I think that would push that number way up.
Yeah.
But it might just help us. It could put some brackets on our thinking. Super. And does that conclude? Do we hear from everyone who wanted to?
Was any of those comments? Did anybody online have anything that they wanted to add?
So this is Miriam. I do, being that I reside in La Jara, I do feel that 10 to 15 units, I feel there should be more. Is there an abundance of unutilized land in La Jara that's not currently being, or as far as, because I know for Antonito, there's the school building, and I do agree that could have potential, the old school. But for here in La Jara, is there anything other that, any other abandoned buildings or any land or anything?
I think we had the bit of the piece of land that Karen was speaking to before. That's the one that I'm aware of. But I think it'd be interesting to hear from others if others know. I like, often these meetings end with walking to a site, so I'm hoping that'll happen today.
Well, I do know, and it would have been great if Larry would have been here, because Larry knows more about who has the land. Yes, the town of La Jara does own some land, I guess, southeast of here, where part of it is for BMX track. And then there's another part of land that, they're open to discussion on what they want to do with it. I do know that there have been some other landowners who have talked about two or three other landowners that have had that in their mind or throwing around the thought about bringing more housing, as in apartments, to the area. But like I said, Larry would have been a good resource for that.
Yeah, and we can follow up with him.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe he would have been as well. I've met with Larry, and there is, I understand, Karen, the land where it's located and what you're talking about after talking to Larry. But yeah, it would have been nice to have Larry attend this. Yes. Thank you.
Another aspect of what we're looking at through this housing study is that we are kind of trying to do a housing or land inventory, kind of informal at the moment, just by driving around town and trying to see where there's land, which homes probably could be renovated that are currently abandoned, and then kind of pulling some information from the assessors. And then when we're through some of these more concrete phases that we have to do, if there's funding available still, we are going to look at doing a more formal look at that if there's a possibility of the funding available to do that. But currently right now, Will and I, myself with other people, we've been going into all these communities and just kind of taking tallies and seeing where they're at. La Jara is one we kind of started, didn't quite have enough time to get finished today. So hopefully by the time we get through to the action phasing, we'll have a little bit more of an idea of potential land, homes that might be abandoned or could be revitalized in some way. And we'll kind of have some better ideas of where some of this can happen.
I want to just I'm just continuing to think about things, but Pinellas County has a lot of little towns, there's the two major ones of La Jara and Antonito, but then there's Sanford and Manassas and Capulín, and I just wonder if there's any thoughts or that have gone into, I know that we can only do so many of these as far as really surveying and looking at the needs, and we chose certain ones to do that with in the San Luis Valley. But did you get any feedback on some of those other towns if there's needs there?
So I'm gonna probably ask Dawn to answer that one because she was more doing the scoping of who was interested. And I think, and certainly a thing could be a third, like a part 3 to, if there were other towns that have now, it's been interesting how doing these sessions, we've noticed some people kind of perk up and say, hey, we've been thinking about this too, or this could be relevant. So I think that could be something. But yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about how the towns that we have been working with were picked?
Yeah, so we started putting a group together, and we met a couple of times from some of the community members that had come to the Housing Coalition at one point or the other and said, housing is an issue in my town or my community, how can you help? And we picked the first 4 or 5 that way. We also started looking at where previous data had already been collected, previous studies had already been done. So for instance, Monte Vista had a study, Alamosa had a study, although they were older, they were within the last 20 years. And a lot of the information was still kind of relevant because not a lot of the goals had been met yet for those. And they were kind of the 2 communities that we see most of the housing happening in anyways. And so we kind of want to stay away from them. And we just kind of started taking a poll. We started reaching out to communities, reaching out to people in communities and finding out what they thought and if they thought their community would be interested in housing, if they felt there was a need for housing. Some communities got back to us, they made the list. There were some that we didn't even add to the list to begin with because they had studies who reached out and said, hey, we want to be part of this, we'll pay our share if you can make us part of this process. We started with 6 and we ended up with 14. We realized a couple of them were close enough in makeup we could combine them together, like Blanca Fort Garland and Mosca Hooper, so they got combined into one. And then some we went into and they just didn't have an interest at all. They didn't feel they had a housing need, they thought they had it under control, or they just didn't feel like they had the resources or the time to really be a part of what we were doing. The city of Alamosa commissioned their own study and kind of in conjunction with ours. So we've been able to combine those 2 together. And then, like I said, some of the others had some small studies done in the past, but we really listened to which communities told us they wanted a study, but they couldn't afford it, or their community members wanted a study, but maybe their town didn't think it was necessary, and we just listened to the people, and that's how our communities were picked. There was no way we could get them all. The cost of the study was pretty significant with just the ones we had. Our initial budget was $272,000. So we kind of had to whittle and see where we felt housing was going to make the greatest impact as well, so that we were using the money we were receiving from our grants and our donations from jurisdictions in a way that the data could actually be put to use in the future.
All right, anything else? Let's jump into our questions then, and we have sort of 3 areas. So I'd love to start with goals. And if you can just kind of take a few minutes to step back from our busy day today and think out, 5-10 years from now, if we've been really awesome and done an amazing job with housing, what would things look like in La Jara and the town of Antonito?
Well, obviously, we would be more housing.
It's a softball.
More businesses, more of a balance between people being able to work here plus live here and not commute so far, or even be able to just, that there would be more of a balance, basically.
Nice. Anything specific in terms of how much or what priorities you have in terms of what the new housing look like?
Well, what we've been talking about, so we're multifamily housing. We're not public housing, so that kind of separates us in a way where we can build new homes, but they won't be subsidized unless I can find vouchers where we can have some of them, be subsidized by the government. But the goal is to provide affordable housing to people. Are we going to make a ton of money off this? No, we won't, but at least the goal is to provide adequate housing, housing that's up to standard. You wouldn't believe how many houses out here are not, are not adequate, who don't have, just, even the electricity, and they're not up to code and so on, is what I'm trying to say. We've had people on, who utilize our housing choice voucher system, and they look for houses, and people are renting out houses that don't have a ceiling, or their floor is dirt, or, and some people are forced or feel like they're forced to accept things like that just because there's nothing around.
No other choices, yeah.
So, just, to be able to bring more housing that's, that feels like a home to them. Our thoughts are that we would start here in La Jara, and depending on how it goes here, we would expand to Sanford and Manassas. We do have a little bit of land on our housing, under the Housing Authority, and we would actually be able to separate that from HUD and be able to put more houses there as well.
Oh, excellent.
That's a great site for us to think of.
Yeah. Go ahead.
One thing that's come up a couple of times is the idea of doing scattered site projects. And so if the right kind of funding that was tied to if it needed to be a certain number of units in order to get that funding, you could maybe do projects, Conejos County, like we just mentioned, is something that has all these different places around, and you could do scattered. It's possible, to do a project at the same time and take advantage of those economies of scale. So it's just something to think about.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to convene with the other housing authority directors on that. 'Cause,
Right.
yeah, the sort of, we're seeing a lot of like, need 10 units here, 10 units there. Yeah. Miriam or others on the phone?
Eloise, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you. As I was listening to the young lady speak just moments ago, one of the things that, and maybe I'm just going to reiterate what she had said, but kind of in summary, I think one of the goals when we're looking at 5 to 10 and actually out into the future, affordable housing, from what she had described, that she wasn't able to do some things with the existing housing stock, which is what brought to mind that one of the goals should be the quality, to improve the quality of your housing stock, not just increase number of homes, because at that point you're merely putting a Band-Aid on as an immediate solution to a need in the community. However, I think one of the goals is when you have a quality inventory of houses or homes that can be recirculated as renters move into homes and someone else can come in. So again, you keep utilizing and being able to use some of the stock that you have. I think that that's very important. If not, then are you potentially, without a quality home being available, are you potentially increasing the number of abandoned homes and the cost that you're reinvesting into those, when if you would have gone, I'm going to say to a certain degree, a quality, affordable home, then you have something that can work for you today as well as recirculate and work for you in the future.
We definitely hear that one a lot, that bringing those abandoned homes back up to usable condition, and it is one of the items on our list, but new construction is also something we hear a lot. So I think finding that good mix between the two is going to be key.
Yeah. Did anyone else want to speak to goals? I wanted to, go ahead.
No, I apologize. No, I just wanted to say that I'm in alignment with a lot of what Karen spoke about earlier as far as goals. So thank you.
Awesome. So I was curious about, so as we've been talking about this whole theme of abandoned homes and the issue of how they get to be abandoned, right? So if, you know, an elderly relative passes away and the kids are out of town or whatever, and is there some kind of point at which the home isn't, you know, it's still habitable and there's a place to save it? You know, before, I mean, I think there's a whole, I think we will certainly be recommending and addressing how do we bring homes that are pretty far gone back, but how do we keep them from getting so far gone was sort of this curiosity I had as Dawn and I were driving around together. So I wondered if there's, and to Karen's point about homes being not code compliant, right? But so it's like, if there was a gap we could fill, and I'm just totally brainstorming, but like to figure out both, instead of letting the home go to being abandoned, do the renovations that are needed, turn it from being owner occupied to rented, by perhaps the same family that's out of town, then they would actually have the rental income. If there was some kind of local group that could do the day-to-day property management and make sure that it was running and functioning well. So I'm just curious if that's something that, if that's accurate, that gap might, or that approach or that gap might be helpful. And if you guys have any other thoughts about that.
I really never thought about it, but in this discussion, I definitely look at vacant homes. You know, would it be a possibility? Would it be a possibility for us to not only build new ones, but also buy, you know, other homes? Or even, you know, we do have a nonprofit called Valley Housing Coalition, or Valley Housing Corporation. And, you know, through that nonprofit, can we buy homes? You know, we're under the HUD umbrella, so, you know, I would definitely have to look into something like that, but that would be awesome. You know, buy a big house, make a triplex out of it or a duplex. And, you know, like Eloise said, just look at those homes and bring them back to life, basically, instead of them staying abandoned.
Yeah.
So one thing is that same program that you had set up to deal with abandoned homes and provide homeowners with the opportunity to get some funds for rehab and encourage them and show them the value of being able to put their home on the market and not just sit there and do anything, but to have it work for them.
Yeah.
That same program could be used for those that you're talking about that are newly, you know, not far gone abandoned.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know? And if that program was promoted enough to where you know, people knew about it, then maybe a family that, you know, the kids are in Denver or somewhere, and they might say, hey, there's that one program that we could use. And there's this property management service and this property management service, and maybe you are a property management service, you know, that can help the situation. Yeah. And just kind of put together some tools, a package for people to be able to know. It's interesting.
Cool, intriguing. All right, so our next topic is land and partnerships. I feel like we already pretty much touched on this in the discussion about the town-owned land and behind the wagon wheel, but I'm curious about if is there anyone currently building in the community, like contractors or, you know, anyone who has residential expertise, and then, you know, other thoughts about maybe who's missing or who do we need to kind of recruit to this if we were to go in the building new direction.
One that stands out is Red Construction. I know that they're building. There's another one, I don't know if it's called A&A Construction, but it's Phil Archuleta. He's also they're doing construction, mostly in Alamosa though.
But from here.
Yeah, but
Okay.
from here.
So all aspects construction? We saw their truck today driving around Antonito, and their renovation and restoration is their key pieces. Might be worth looking or reaching out to them as well, especially if you're wanting to buy and rehab some homes.
What about lending and architecture and stuff like that? Do you have to draw from Alamosa for all that, or are there some local resources?
I believe it's Alamosa. I mean, there's a community bank here, but I'm not sure what type of services they have.
There's a credit union that does purchase assistance occasionally. But yeah, I think most of the people who are buying are utilizing Alamosa.
There's Guadalupe Credit Union.
There you go, thank you.
You're welcome.
One thing I want to mention on land is that there's more land than we realize a lot of times when you start looking at lots that don't have anything on them at all that you can infill develop on those. And then you've got pretty large properties or pieces of lots, you know, that people have their homes on that have room for like an accessory dwelling unit, an ADU. And that kind of a program, you know, you get a few people that are interested in doing an ADU on their land, and that's a few more units out there. That's especially true in Sanford and Manassas. The way those towns were developed originally is they have very, very large pieces of ground so that they have enough room for farming and their house and everything like that. And so there's plenty of room for ADUs in Sanford and Manassas for sure.
Here, well, in La Jara and Antonito, are people interested in that, or do you guys know what the regulatory environment is, but for like building a little casita or something on your behind or beside your existing house?
I don't know.
Okay. We didn't see any driving around. Sometimes they're pretty hidden though.
Yeah, I saw several in Costa County yesterday, but I did not really see many. I don't think I saw any today. Sometimes they're very disguised because of old garages and you can't really tell they're a home. But yeah, that would be interesting to look at.
Does anyone on the phone have any insights about that?
Can you repeat yourself, please? What you?
Yeah. I was just asking about, are people in La Jara or Antonito interested in building like a accessory unit, a little casita next to or behind your house? And if so, would the rules allow it? So it's something we might be able to just research more outside of this meeting, but if there was anyone who happened to know.
So yes, for La Jara, yes, I do know there is people interested in that. As far as the I know it's requires building permits, but I'm not too sure in the exact what permits and that you would have to get for that. But yes, definitely in La Jara, I know they would be, because there is a couple.
Oh, cool. Nice. Well, that can give us a starting point to go down that track. Thanks. All right, well, anything else anyone wants to say about land and partnerships?
I'm not seeing anything online.
Cool. We'll move to our third topic, which is utilizing existing programs. So this is Dawn's lead.
Yeah, so the San Luis Valley Housing Coalition has programs like the home rehab for owner-occupied housing. We actually just did a great project in Antonito that just finalized a couple of weeks ago. We had, like Willa said, a client who was living in affordable housing, purchase a home fairly reasonable. If I remember right, it was for like under 50,000. The home had been abandoned for several years because the previous owners had passed away. We went in initially to start just doing basic rehab when we found lead-based paint and asbestos. So we were able to go in and do abatement and rehab the home and bring it back to habitability. And total, the owner ended up having about $106,000 into the home with purchase and rehab. So we put about 56,000, and I believe, like I said, that her purchase price was around 50, and brought this cute little 3-bedroom home back to habitability at Antonito. But in 6 years that I've been with the company, that's the only one we've done in Conejos County. We have another one we're trying to do right now to bring electricity to code, because that tends to be the biggest thing we're finding right now in older homes is electricity is original. And so it's starting to fail and it needs to be brought up to current codes. But we would like to see, how do we bring this program and things like the energy resource weatherization and maybe even their solar program into your guys' communities? You know, what is stopping community members from using it? Is that the process? Are there barriers? A lack of understanding or knowledge of the programs at all? We just are looking for some feedback on that so we can make these programs a little bit better.
Do you work at all with those homes that aren't really abandoned, but there's owners there that aren't living in the home, but would be willing to rent it out?
So we currently can't go in if it's gonna be a rental. We are applying for funding for that this year, but it's really competitive. So I don't know if we'll, because it's national funding, but it is something we're looking at because we do hear that landlords, they may have that abandoned home, and they would be willing to rent it out if somebody can help them bring it back at an affordable rate. So definitely something to look at within our funders.
Well, I'm currently applying for the Section 533 grant, the Housing Preservation Grant.
Oh, awesome.
And in the rules, I saw that it is possible to either, you know, to help the landlords, you know, do some preservation in order to get it rented, as long as they promise to rent to a very low income for a total of 5 or 6 years, I think.
It's 5 years, yeah.
Yeah, but 50,000 just isn't a lot of money sometimes.
Yeah, so we're also looking at that one along with the federal home loan bank in Topeka.
Well, don't be my competition.
It seems like you guys need to collaborate.
Yeah, we should have some conversations with Terry at USDA.
Yeah.
They haven't funded the 533 in this area. I think she's been over 20 years.
Right.
And unfortunately, Colorado only gets $100,000.
Yeah.
But last 3 years, nobody applied for it.
Yeah.
So I think maybe we need to have a conversation with her because I think she's trying to push it in this area. But if we're all not working together on it, I think it's going to probably keep all of us from it, and rather than working together and maybe being able to get all of it.
Okay.
We are not doing it with landlords. So if you are thinking of applying to help with landlords, we are looking at using it for our housing rehab we already do. So that might be where it benefits, where we both could possibly get in it.
Okay.
Well, and I like 100,000 to homes goes with our Start Small campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the nice thing is if we get the other program we are applying for, those funds and the other funds can be matched together. They can both be put into the same home because they're coming from 2 separate funding sources.
Ooh.
So if we said 5 homes, $10,000 a piece, and then we use some other fundings at the same rate, or higher rates, we could eventually put multiple pots of money into the same house under one loan, and give them a better, opportunity to actually be able to make the home habitable.
Good idea.
I like it. Anything else you wanted, either on the phone or Dawn, you wanted to hear about? It seems like this question about how we better get the word out, is there a problem with the reputation of the programs? Are they just not known? Or do people have fears about the regulations? Just, if anyone has insight on that, I think that could be helpful both for the funders and for Dawn.
And actually, you look lost in thought, but I have a question for you. Has Division of Housing thought anything about using their HDG funding to be allowed to go into rental properties that are being utilized by low-income families? Like what they're talking here?
We had a program that we tried to start. I mean, it's similar, but it was on, I think, a larger scale. So it was a kind of like a landlord SFOO program. So if a landlord had a rental property, that needed a new roof or something like that, we would help with those renovations. But then I don't think our use covenant was as long. I think it was only maybe like 5 years or 10 years or something like that, maybe 5. But we just got no bites on it. And it was only, I think it was managed by or administered by one organization out on the Western Slope, Housing Resources of Western Colorado. So we just kind of kiboshed it. I think if somebody wanted to, I don't know, if there was interest in restarting it, I don't see us, saying no. And if an application were made for something like that, I think we would, just having that interest from, homeowners or landlords would probably be good enough for us.
Andrew, was it sized to address bigger buildings? Because it seems like here it's like, here's this house, I rent it. It's not like an apartment, not.
I think initially, in that program, it was not huge buildings because, it's Western Slope. So I'm sure there was a lot of maybe 10, 15 unit buildings. But I think it's a good idea to maybe talk about that. And, I think there would need to be some internal discussion just on our use covenant issues, stuff like that. But I don't see why we wouldn't be willing to consider, a smaller, 1 unit at a time. Kind of depends on what the per unit subsidy would be, per unit limit would be. And whether, I see it more as a program, almost like the SFOO thing where we're, granting a larger sum and then it's administered by, say, San Luis Valley Housing Coalition. Because I don't think we would want to do one-offs.
Well, that's what I was thinking. If we were able to start a program using Division Housing, maybe CHAPA or some of the other foundation funders, then I could work with the smaller communities to help find the landlords and help them understand and run it just kind of like our rehab program that we're doing now, but be specific to landlords with covenants that they would have to rent to somebody in a specific income bracket or below, that rents would have to be at a specific dollar amount or below in order to meet affordability, and that maybe we put a covenant that they would have to be open to accepting vouchers as well, because we would be bringing the home to the standards that vouchers require, and we would be helping them with the process of that. I think the Housing Coalition would even be willing to do property management during that 5-year affordability period, if that helped the process go a little bit smoother as well. So I think it's definitely worth the conversation.
I wonder if we would do some sort of like, I don't know, I don't want to say like long-term monitoring, but you know, I know that our asset management team doesn't want to do annual monitoring. Um, but I think there would be a little bit of concern if it's like, you know, a homeowner that's renting out a property that, you know, they go through the renovations and then the person moves out and they just move in. So we want to sort of like have some sort of like safeguards um, against that. And you know, a use covenant is one thing, but if you're not sort of checking up on uh, the actual resident and you know, the tenants, kind of get away from us.
I think that's where having the housing coalition manage to make sure income levels were being met, the house was continuing to be maintained, or even that we were doing an annual tenant and home inspection. If we were already going to be in a community, we could go by and do an inspection if we planned it ahead of time. I think that would all be something that we would be open to and probably could do in conjunction with housing authorities. If there's a housing authority in that community, then we could utilize them to help us with some of that as well. And kind of partner with some of the people already doing that work in each community.
Right, because it would have to be, basically it's gonna be income-based, right?
Yeah.
For you to be able to live in that house, so you, the property manager does annual recertifications.
Yeah.
You know, and so there, every single year, it's being tracked. And we're making sure that we're, you know, that the tenant and the landlord are meeting those, you know, those guidelines.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's something maybe me, you, and Karen have a conversation, and Jeff have a conversation with.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a program, there exists a program today in the Western Slope that Jeff put together for a revolving loan fund for rental type situations. And it's the same thing, Andrew, where it hasn't been utilized that much. And I just don't know when that happens. It seems like what we're identifying is there's a lot of need for something like that. But you have to convince.
Who administers it or where is it located?
It's the what's the one, Housing Resources for Western Colorado? Is that right?
Colorado.
Yeah.
That sounds right.
Did you just mention that too, Andrew?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope it's the same program.
I wonder if it's the same program with us working together possibly, but you're right. And you know, in that case, that's helpful to know that it's the same one, because it could be a problem or an issue with that particular program not being promoted that well or understood. And so if you really let people know that that's available.
Well, and I think what we're talking here is if these families are abandoning the homes because nobody's here and they're really hurting the community, if they knew there was the ability to bring in some money to do some minor repairs right away, and then have the ability of having someone in housing do property management for them, which is the gap Willa mentioned earlier that we were thinking was why so many homes are being abandoned. We could potentially either slow down the abandonment of homes and possibly some of them that are there, bring them back, because if you have a home and you don't live here and there's no one to help you manage it, you're just gonna let it sit because it's too hard to deal with. But if organizations like ours came in and said, hey, we could put some money into it, take part of the rent to pay back the loan, and help with the management piece, and then it would still possibly put a little bit of money in your pocket every month as well, it might help with, I mean, I think Will and I have been to like 6 communities and have come over 100 abandoned homes in the valley. It could be a solution to some of that.
I believe it. There in my town, I live in Capuline, there are so many abandoned homes there. And that's the, you know, that's the scenario is that the, you know, parents, grandparents, they pass away, the kids own it, the kids live in the city, they don't have time or have no reason to come back. So it just stays there. And if we could get some of those going, that would really be perfect.
Yeah, so I think that's a great great conversation to keep going.
Totally, and it feels like now it's evolving into a couple of different tracks, like help a family turn the asset they own into something that's more productive, as well as approach families to purchase and try to create home ownership opportunities. Or have San Luis Valley Housing Coalition or the Housing Authority own the property as a rental. So lots of iterations we could play with. And I think that whole spectrum of not abandoned yet through pretty far gone, like if you had kind of a mix in your portfolio, some of them are going to be expensive to do, and hopefully some of them would be pretty, like, pretty manageable. Yeah. So that it could all balance out in the end.
Andrew unmuted yourself. Did you have something else to add to that, or were you just still unmuted?
I mean, the one thing I think about is, with the Monta Vista program, and there was the idea. Uh-oh, my dog's gonna bark. The mail's here. The idea was, to see these abandoned homes and then rehab them, but most of the ones that had been abandoned were beyond rehabilitation. So it's a matter of do you want to, spend $100,000, or can you even spend $100,000 to bring it up to a livable standard, or, raise it, put something new there, which is a whole different, I guess that's one of the iterations of the idea.
Yeah, that might be intriguing to think about. If we're doing it in a really targeted way, you probably don't start with things that you can't bring back, right? But if the community desire is we got to get rid of something that's an attractive nuisance, it's going to catch on fire, or someone's going to get hurt, or whatever, then maybe we try to build that into the program too. Andrew, do you have anything else you want to share about the Monta Vista example?
No.
Okay.
It's been very slow to get off the grounds. And yeah, we learned some lessons. So I think we have some,
they're forging the path. And so these other ones could hopefully get going. Learn the, not have to recreate the wheel.
If I remember correctly, Andrew, those are properties that are going up for sale because of lack of paying taxes, and the city's taking them over and then developing them. Is that right?
They weren't necessarily going up for sale, but the city would have, if they've, because they have access to that sort of property tax information. And so if there were homes that were delinquent on property taxes, then they had to call the owners, or whoever was listed as the owner, to essentially negotiate a purchase. And so that usually the idea was to purchase it for the price of those delinquent taxes.
And so I wonder about that scenario. What they're trying to do is own those, right? And so I wonder about the scenario where they want to maintain ownership. But anyway, I guess what it shows is that you have to actively go out there and find the owners, and they're not going to come to you necessarily.
Yeah. There's a lot of legwork involved, for sure.
I know some owners.
We've already had several.
There's the legwork.
We've had several reach out already just through the housing, wanting to know, is there money for landlords? And a lot of them haven't attended when we're like, well, not yet. They're like, oh, well, then I'm gonna pass. So I know it's out there, and there's a want and a need for it. It's just making sure we set it up properly if there's an ability to do so.
Awesome. Any other thoughts from people on the phone or in the room about utilizing existing programs, or about this sort of evolution of a program to address homes that might be lost? Hearing none, let's go to our wrap up. So we're in the second part of our listening tours. We did Saguache, Rio Grande County, Mineral County earlier in June. Tomorrow we'll be in San Luis, and then with everyone we've already heard from, we're just asking that you get comments to Dawn or myself by July 23rd. We'll turn a new version of these, or final version, that you can use in your community, and that can also be that sort of final document that then we rely on as we get into action planning and implementation. So I want to say thank you so much for your time this afternoon, for all the good ideas shared, and we really appreciate the opportunity to work with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any final comments from the people online before we close out for the day?
I want to say a final comment.
Sure, Jeff.
And it's just that Will had just kind of brushed over getting to action plans and implementation. And I feel like that's one of the strongest benefits of going with your consulting firm. Is a lot of the other consulting firms that are doing housing needs assessments, they just kind of come up with their own recommendations of something to do. And sometimes you think, let's see, I think you pulled that out of the last one and the last one and the last one. It's all the same recommendations. And so what we're doing here, and the opportunity that we have, is to do a community informed action plan and really put down who is responsible, who's partnering, where it's going to happen, and put dates to it. And it's a real action plan. And so it's something to really look forward to. And so I'm excited to see that stage as well.
Oh, thank you. Excellent. Us as well. We'll be back.
Yes, we'll be back in these communities in the fall, probably, right? Like, yeah, in early fall. So be watching for that. Yes, Jan, we're glad to have you, and we look forward to seeing how we can partner with Rocky Mountain SARE in moving forward your housing initiatives and mission. So please keep in touch.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
See you.